I'm Ryan Smith, R-Y-A-N, S-M-I-T-H. I'm Ryan Smith, co-founder and CEO of Qualtrics.
Okay. Let's first make your Utah connection. Born and raised, tell me about your
Yeah, so I moved to Utah when I was 2 or 3 years old. My father was a professor at University of Oregon, so I was born in Eugene, Oregon. My father's from Washington State, and my mother's from Los Altos, California, Palo Alto, the area. And so I pretty much grew up here. Lived outside. I lived in Seoul, Korea when I was 17. Did a Mormon mission in Mexico City, and then lived in Denver, Colorado, and worked for a little bit in LA, and came back to Utah, and I've been here ever since.
Nice. So your parents moved here to work here then from Oregon?
Yeah. So both my parents were academics for a long time. So they're both PhDs. My father is a professor at BYU in the Marriott School. And my mother actually was at, Utah Valley for a really long time. And then they both later in their careers have decided to go and kind of take the entrepreneurial leap in different ways, and it's been pretty interesting.
Huh. Did you go to BYU then?
I went to BYU.
Business?
Business.
Okay. Specific? Marketing?
Marketing.
Okay. Dad taught you?
A little bit. I did take a couple classes from him. And I don't know that I would have done marketing, but it was kind of interesting because I wanted to go finance, but I'd already taken so many marketing classes that it was kind of the way we leaned. And it wasn't like creative marketing, it was much more on the business marketing side.
Huh. And then you used that, did you go work out in the public sector with that degree?
So early on, I worked not with the degree, because we started Qualtrics when I was a junior in college, right? But I did do a couple internships, one in LA and one in Denver, Colorado, one with Ford Motor Company and Hewlett Packard, and this was in 2002, right after the dot-com bust, so those were the safe places to go work. And then we started seeing a little bit of success with Qualtrics, and I was like, let's do this full time. And that was pretty hard for my dad, who was, pretty hell-bent on this is what the academic life looks like, and I actually dropped out of college to do it, and that's kind of been the road that we followed.
So your dad saw this as an opportunity then with Qualtrics and the type of work?
Well, I don't think in 2002, I don't think any of us saw it as something that was going to be, it was much more of a hobby project. I mean, it really was. I don't think it was like, hey, let's go do a startup, this is the road. We just started seeing some success with customers, and there was only 2 of us, in those days, and then I had a friend, Stuart Orgel, who came and joined, and it was a lot of Stuart and I going, hey, can we really do this? And Stu was in the business school, and we kind of orchestrated our schooling around Qualtrics as opposed to, Qualtrics around our school. And, here we are 14 years later, still coloring in the same lines that we started back then, just in a different way.
Wow. You guys worked out of your home, is this the garage, the business?
It's
garage?
definitely the basement story.
Yeah.
So we were in the basement for 5 years, and that's a long time. We had a big basement. I mean, there was like 20 people there. And it was tough to recruit people to come buy into the basement vision and do that. But at the time, once again, I mean, you got to think back. The world blew up in '99, right? Where everyone who had the high-flying startups actually crashed, and so there was definitely a shadow over tech a little bit and some caution there. And it's kind of interesting to see the cycle because it kind of blew back up in 2007, 8, 9. And if you kind of look at the world that we're in right now, it's all high-flying, and having gone through a couple of these cycles, there is an ebb and flow that we haven't seen in a couple of years that's coming, right?
Okay. Give me, if you can, a brief description what you feel Qualtrics' flagship is, of what you do, just your best description.
So we built a technology or a platform which people are able to go and log into and create. And what they can do is they can create programs to help them understand their experiences. So every organization provides experiences, whether they know it or they don't. There's an experience that you're providing your employees, or experiences you're providing your customers, or anyone that uses your product. There's an experience. And what we're doing is we're helping companies close the experience gap, which is we think something's happening, but this is what's really happening. And often brands are really surprised, or companies are really surprised, that when someone leaves the company or a customer quits or they tell someone something bad about the company, they didn't see that happening. And part of it's because they don't have the technology to actually gather that experience data. And so Qualtrics has developed a technology that lets you gather all of your customer experience data, all of your employee experience data, all of your brand or product experience data on one single platform. And so it's really cool. And we work with 9,000 brands globally that are doing that, all from yogurt to cars to every time you fly on most of our popular airlines, which is kind of interesting recently. So it's you get to see that, you know, a brand thinks something's going on, but actually what's the experience down here is totally different. And that gap, our data helps close. And anyone can use it. It's actually really easy to use and really easy to do, where a long time ago it was really hard.
Huh, interesting. This entrepreneurial spirit, which I could say you've got, was that something, when did you realize that?
So I don't think I ever really said, hey, I'm going to grow up and go do a startup. I think probably the good thing I had in my head was there wasn't a picture of what things had to look like. You know, I wasn't in the business school saying, hey, I've got to go be an accountant, I've got to go do this. I was actually kind of down with whatever. If it felt like a good opportunity, let's go do it. And I always said, I'm way less, if I think about myself today, I'm way less of an entrepreneur than I am like opportunistic. And I would much rather be opportunistic than to be an entrepreneur. I know a lot of entrepreneurs who can never get out of their own way, and they're always inventing and tinkering, and they can never do anything or scale anything. And even when you do, that has a short shelf life. I mean, the iPhone hasn't had a shelf life. They had to come out with iPhone 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? And so here's one of the greatest inventions of all time, one of the greatest entrepreneurial, you know, endeavors of all time that's changed humanity. However, it's 3 years later, it's like, where's the next thing? So if you're not opportunistic consistently, then you're probably not going to survive long in this game. And you know, we've been in tech for 15 years, and we've seen almost all of this happen. And it's pretty amazing how often we've got to iterate.
Huh. Is there something that you can see, that survival influence factor that allowed you to thrive in this?
So I think the same thing that got us here is the same thing that's going to help us in the future. So I think there's a couple things. Number one is, in tech, you've got to be pretty scrappy, right? Where you've got to be able to think of things in a way that people don't think of things. Or you've got to execute on what everyone thinks about way better than everyone else. And it's kind of one of those two things, right? And reality is most great innovations require both. The second thing is, I think you've got to be very much in a spot where you're comfortable with ripping down what got you there. So when we first started, we were only targeting academics. So our goal was to have every academic institution, higher education institution in the world using Qualtrics. And we did a pretty good job at that. I mean, if you go to school anywhere, they're on the Qualtrics platform. And you know, I don't go a day before I see someone or I interview someone from Michigan or Princeton or Oxford, and they're like, oh, we use Qualtrics. I was just at Stanford and said, how many of you use Qualtrics? Everyone in the class raised their hand. I wasn't involved in that, right? It's just gone that way. That took a long time, and it's tough to predict that something would go viral, but it's happened. But when we moved from the academic market to businesses and corporations in the enterprise, that was a huge shift for us. Like, what had gotten us to this point was not going to be what got us to the next, you know, 5 or 10 years. And a lot of times we get really comfortable with what got us here, and actually we have to get very comfortable ripping down the academic market if we have to. And that's hard. And knowing when to just be able to take an idea that was great, but behind the times.
Okay. Is there anything unique about Utah that allowed you to build this business here to thrive?
So you can incubate in Utah for a long time on very little money. I mean, I think that's the cost of living, and the pressures are very different than like San Francisco right now. I mean, let's be honest, for $4,000 a month, you're going to be in a 3-bedroom apartment. And for $4,000 a month here, you're in $1 million house, right? And so that translates all the way down. I think that we have young talent who are willing to bet on themselves and do things. It's part of the DNA. It's part of the culture of Utah. I mean, look, we created Utah. People came in on a horse and said, this is the place. Like, this is how Utah was created. It's in the DNA a little bit, right? And that's an interesting, way to think about how the culture, people all over the world ask me this all the time, like, especially in the Bay Area, tell me about Utah. It seems to be kind of scrappy and we have a lot of young folks who are willing to do a lot of interesting things and probably aren't as worried a little bit about the money because they can survive a little bit. The downside is we also have a lot of young folks with young families, right? Which is hard. Because the cost structure goes up and the pressure's there. Where we lack is I think that we lack a little bit in where success breeds success, especially on the tech side, is we need to have more bigger or larger tech companies where people have seen it before a little bit to help coach some of the young talent that has got all the energy and the aggressiveness in the world, but just needs some adult supervision or some mentorship around like I did, and I think that's what's starting to happen in Utah. We're starting to see people who are at Amazon who have seen the movie 3 or 4 times and scaled with it and know how to run a company with 800 or 4,000 people. And that's been pretty exciting to watch those people relocate to the state of Utah and move here.
Okay, I'm just gonna. You recently wrote an article that being an entrepreneur is a chance to write your own story, not doing what others have done before. What story are you writing about Ryan Smith?
Well, I'm not really writing a story about Ryan Smith. I mean, my identity is a CEO, and this is hard because I am all in on Qualtrics, and I live, drink, eat, and breathe like Qualtrics, and I have for a long time, and we all do. But Qualtrics can't be my identity. That can't be who I am as an individual. I think the story that I want to write is, hey, if people were showing up to my funeral, was this a good dude? Like, was Ryan a good dude? Was he a good dad? Would people come, right? And say, hey, wow, that guy was like, I went to Lavelle Edwards' funeral, recently, and I was like, whoa, that's what a legacy looks like. And it wasn't any of the football stuff. It was literally like, whoa, this was a good human being. And I've never seen such outpouring from all over the nation for one individual who was a football coach from some small town in Utah. I thought that was pretty cool. And that's what the legacy needs to be in the story to write. I think when it comes to what the story we're writing at Qualtrics is look, we've taken a crazy road to get to where we are. I don't think anyone planned it, but we were opportunistic at every turn. And I think we have a chance to do something that's been, done very rarely in all of tech, let alone in the state of Utah, which is pretty cool.
You mentioned mentors. Is there anyone Utah-based that was a mentor to you?
Oh my word, yeah. There's so many mentors. I feel like I collect mentors, right? I think you're either in learning mode or you're not.
Right.
And one of the things that I've realized early on is like, more of my soul is not a growth strategy for a business. Like, I need help, and if I can get wisdom from anyone, and I think the second I learned that, I think it's been really easy to say, wow, you can learn something from everyone. And so there's a lot of folks who have helped me. I think, I relocated my brother Jared, who was at Google early on and, ran about a third of the world's internet search, and, he's been an incredible mentor, and I'm sure when he went to Google, he wasn't dreaming that he'd go work with his younger brother in Provo, Utah. That was not part of his plan, right? And I threw everything I had at him, for him to come back and work here. A lot of the old WordPerfect folks, it was kind of interesting to study that, like what happened, what went well. I mean, they had the world by the tail, and what went wrong? 30 years later, like, what have you gone to bed with every night that you wished would have been different? And Duff Thompson from WordPerfect who is very much involved there, has actually been pretty helpful and said, hey, look, you don't know what you don't know. I mean, it's been great to like have that kind of mentorship there. And I think, my father's been awesome, right? He's been able to sit back and just say, hey, you guys go. And if I see anyone running into a mountain, I'll tap someone on the shoulder. Fortunately, he hasn't really had to do that, but there's been a lot of mentorship about being selfless and letting a bunch of kids go out and run as fast as they can.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do. Not a lot of people would do that.
Right. Well, one point of advice would you give somebody who's young, coming out of college, wants to start a business? Like one piece of advice now with your experience.
Well, I think there's a lot of people who believe that they're going to go run an MBA exercise, lock arms, and say, we're starting a company, this is what it's going to be, and let's go. And I don't think, as I look at the big companies, that's not how they start. They start by accident. They start because they're working somewhere, or this happens, or this is the problem they're trying to solve. I still don't know that I could go run that exercise and say, hey, Ryan, you're done with Qualtrics, what's next? Like, go. I wouldn't do it. Like, I think that's not how the world goes. And then the other side is like, you don't need to be, to be a founder of something, you don't need to do it all by yourself. Like, I feel like we have a lot of founders within Qualtrics. We're constantly creating startups within Qualtrics. We just opened up Seattle and Dublin. There's nothing more of a startup than saying, okay, here's a credit card, you're heading to Sydney, go open up the office. Like, that's crazy. That's enough to bring someone to their knees. And so I think that as I joined my father with a crazy idea, and Stu and Jared joined, like, we necessarily didn't all have the idea. Together we were able to do it, but if I'd say who came up with the original thought of what we did back then, it was my father alone. And then we jumped on and said, whoa, wait a minute, what if we did this? What if we did this? What if we did this? And so I think everyone thinks that they've got to be the person that's got to come up with the idea. When reality is there's probably one Facebook type idea in the state of Utah. Everyone should go jump on it. Right? As opposed to think you're going to try to come up with 50. Like, I think that there's a couple big ideas. And then even if you have a big idea, it doesn't matter because of the shelf life problem, right? So what a good idea is only, I have people around me that I know, they're like, hey, I came up with this product before they did. I was like, no, you didn't, because they did, right? And so ideas are not really that valuable if you can't execute with them and you can't innovate with those ideas over time. And if you think about where we started, it was like a survey platform for academics, and now we're powering the feedback and experiences for the whole world. Like, that's a huge delta between where we started and where we ended up. And there's 100 pivots between those two areas.
Amazing. Time. That's it. You got to run. She's not hard. She's up. She's so done. One thing.
Yeah. Well, hold on. Hey, I'm in that interview next, right?
So
but they're not waiting for me, are they? Kind of?
You have about 5 minutes.
Okay, we can go from.
Yeah.
Father, give you, like, what one piece of advice or motto he gave you that stuck with you that you now, it's part of you in Qualtrics? Like,
So I think the one thing that my father gave me, there's probably two things. Number one is there's nothing he wouldn't do. So we have stories of him like spraying the weeds of our old building around there. I'll never forget him changing the tires out on his own car. It's like, there's no job that is too small or big for him, right? And I think that's a really good thing, is like, you just get in and you get your hands dirty with whatever it is. And I've had every job at Qualtrics. I still move boxes, right? So I think that that's the one piece of advice. I think the second thing is, time bears a lot of things out. And my father is an extremely patient man, which is probably the opposite of me. And I've tried to get this feature, like try to figure out like how you can be patient. Because reality is everything that we were worried about 4 years ago has played itself out. And a lot of times if you just wait and execute, like, it'll play itself out. We had 70 competitors when we started in the basement, and they had raised all this venture capital money and everything, and we were just two people, and I was like, hey, Dad, like, why don't we do this? Why don't we do this? And finally he turns around and he's like, well, who's stopping you from doing all that. And it was like this aha moment, like, actually no one's stopping me. I'm blocked, I'm frustrated because I don't know how to do it. Well, we just said, hey, we're gonna keep going. We're gonna go to 250 universities. Then from there, people are gonna graduate and take Qualtrics with them. And nothing was better than in 2012 when we raised our first round of funding, which was $70 million. The company who had bought all those other companies and rolled them up and raised all this money sold the whole company for that amount, right? Which is like, whoa, time bared out what my father seemed to know in 2002, that, hey, patience is gonna win here, as long as you're executing with it. You can't just wait it out and not do anything. But if you're grinding every day, time will tell. And time will tell on people, time will tell on things, time will tell on businesses. So I think those are a couple of the things that I've learned. Probably not what he said, but more of like watching someone who's just kind of like a wise, proud uncle watching us run the company. And so it's been good. And I think the family dynamic's really interesting. People always want to talk about it. And we have a lot of family members who aren't involved in Qualtrics, but if you could do it, if you could actually create a tech company and you could do it and it worked and the family dynamic worked, wouldn't you want to do it with your brother and your dad? Like, that would be unbelievable. The problem is it never works out that way, and it's so difficult. But I think one of the reasons why we're successful is because my brother Jared and I could go extremely hard at each other. And I mean almost like ridiculously like confrontational at times. But we'd wake up in the morning and I knew he had to love me and he had to come into work. And what it allowed us to do was push and get to levels that most people don't get to, because once there's a little bit of pain on the first or second iteration of something, well, we got to iteration 17 because we were okay, because we were brothers. And so I think that that's a really interesting point on, if you can make that go, it's a great, but it very rarely works out that way. And, I have two other brothers and a sister who aren't a part of the business, and for whatever reason, Jared and I are the ones that ended up together, and most of that was because he ended up at Google and took a 7-year run there, and I could get someone of his caliber, because he was my brother, back to Utah, where I don't think we could have done that. I mean, Stu and I were sitting in the basement going, how do we get Jared? And it was a 2-year recruiting process, and we thought he was good. We didn't know how good, but he was really good. Right?
What's his role?
So he's a founder, board member. He runs, founder, board member. He runs, he runs a lot of the product in Eng. That's what he ran at Google.
Gotcha.
And so we kind of augment each other, and people don't believe we're from the same gene.
Mold, huh?
Yeah.